Hey gang, using the promo code MTGMudsta, one word, all caps, will get you 10% off orders of $10 or more at Flipside Gaming, Original Magic Art, and orders of singles at Multizone. If they don't have what you're looking for, you could check out TCG Player and use my affiliate link to help support the channel. Looking for a way to bling out your deck and not spend a fortune? Alter Sleaze can help with that, and you can help with the channel at the same time by using my affiliate link. Or, if you're looking to join the Goblin Gang, you can always support me through Patreon. Hey gang, just so you should know, Multizone is giving you the chance to win $100 in store credit. All you have to do to enter to win is use my promo code on an eligible order during the time period of February 15th, 2021 to March 1st, 2021, and you'll be entered to win. It's one entry per household, so good luck and have fun. Alrighty, today's game has me borrowing Derek's Obuun deck, and I keep again into the Spires, Stirring Wildwood, Oracle of Moldiah, Azusa, Awakening of the Vitu-Ghazi, Command Tower, and Crucible of Worlds. Derek is playing a Xenagos deck, keeping Veil of Summer, Greater Good, The Great Henge, Finale of Devastation, Sylvan Library, Mountain, and a Firelit Thicket. Mark is playing his Merieke deck, keeping 2 Swamps, an Island, Dismal Backwater, Limdol's Vault, Smothering Tithe, and Thousand Year Elixir. Chris is playing Morophon, keeping Rishkar's Expertise, Shapesharer, Godhead of Awe, Sacred Foundry, Muldrotha, Mana Confluence, and Niv Mizzet Reborn. Mark wins the die roll and starts us off. Mark plays a tapped Dismal Backwaters, gaining 1 life. Derek plays a Firelit Thicket. I play a tapped Stirring Wildwoods and pass. Chris plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Avatar as it enters. Mark plays a Watery Grave and takes 2 so it comes in untapped. He plays a Magerite Stone and passes. Derek plays a Mountain and casts Sylvan Library. I play a Command Tower and then pay 2 mana for Sylvan Advocate. Chris plays a Mana Confluence and then casts Sol Ring. He takes 1 from tapping the Confluence for a blue, which he uses to help cast Shapesharer. Mark draws and then plays a Swamp. He casts a Puppeteer and passes to Derek. Derek uses his library on his draw step and pays 4 life to keep an extra card. He plays a Forest and then casts Kadama's Reach, passing to me while searching for his basics. My turn has me drawing no lands, and I cast a Darksteel Garrison onto my Command Tower. I then pass to Chris. Chris plays a tap Shockland, and then casts a Utopia Tree before passing to Mark. Mark plays another Swamp, and passes. Derek draws after using his library, and Mark casts Limdol's Vault at the end of his draw step. He bottoms his first 5, and then his second 5, and keeps the 3rd set, rearranging them and losing 2 life. Derek then plays a Mountain, and he casts Gruul Signet. He taps enough for Selvala, passing. I need a land, which I can't seem to draw, and I just pass to Chris. Chris is also finding his lands to be a bit camera shy, and in an odd move, taps enough and loses 1 life to cast a Rishkar's Expertise. He draws 1 card, and then puts out a Niv Mizzet Reborn as his free spell. He gets 2 cards of the 10 he reveals, putting Villainous Wealth and Absorb to hand. He then draws a card from Selvala, since he is the biggest creature entering. It's a land, which he plays, and he passes to Mark. Mark draws, and plays a Plains. He casts Smothering Tithe, and then passes turn. Derek uses his library trigger, which technically counts as draw, and even though he doesn't keep any extras, he still gives Mark 3 treasures. He plays Taiga for turn, and then taps enough for a Xenagos before passing to me. I'm beginning to question if I wasn't given a joke deck at this point, as I draw, and then pay 2 for the Tithe trigger, and pass, discarding down to 7. Chris draws and lets Mark get a treasure. He activates the Shapesharer, having it become a copy of Selvala, and then activates his copy of Selvala to make some mana because of how big Niv Mizzet is, and uses 3 to cast his Elemental Bond, and then plays a Godhead of Awe. It enters and triggers the bond, letting Chris draw a card. Chris then realizes he should have done all this post-combat, and is only able to boop Derek for 1 with Niv Mizzet. Mark plays an Island, and then taps 3 for Thousand Year Elixir. He then brings up Merieke, and then just passes. Derek uses his library again, letting Mark get the 3 treasure tokens as he digs for an answer. He taps 5 in his main phase for Ilharg, and moves to combat. He puts the Xenagos trigger onto Ilharg, and swings it at Mark. This gives him an on-attack trigger from Ilharg, and he puts a creature from hand, and he drops Dragonlord Atarka. The Dragonlord entering lets Derek deal 5 damage divided among creatures as he so chooses, and he takes out the Godhead, and puts 1 on Merieke. With the targets on the stack, Mark activates Merieke because of his elixir being out, and he targets Xenagos. Once this hits the stack, Derek responds by casting Veil of Summer to try and give his stuff hexproof. Mark decides to respond after that goes onto the stack and gains priority, and pays 1 to untap Merieke with the Magerite Stone, and then reactivates her. He targets Xenagos again as he reactivates her, and with her second still ability on the stack, he untaps her once more, but this time with a 1000-year elixir. He then retaps her to steal Selvala this time, and with that trigger on the stack, activates his Puppeteer to untap her again, and then taps her again to steal Ilharg. The end result of this is that Mark steals all of those creatures, and they then move to resolve the Dragonlord Atarka damage, which takes Merieke out. Selvala and Ilharg are then destroyed, with Ilharg going 3rd from the top on Derek's library. Mark then takes a smack from Atarka though. Moving to Derek's end step, he has to put back to hand Dragonlord Atarka, and he passes to me. I draw, and move to combat. I hit Derek with the Advocate, and pass turn. Chris plays a City of Brass for his land for turn. He taps enough for a Consecrated Sphinx, and draws from the Elemental Bond, letting Mark get a treasure. Moving to combat, Niv Mizzet hits Mark, and Chris then passes. Mark draws, and Chris draws 2, which gives Mark 2 more treasures. Mark then brings out Merieke in his main phase, and he casts a Chaos Wand, passing to Derek. Derek uses his library, giving Mark even more treasures, and he pays 4 life to keep an extra card in hand, and he then plays a land. We then see Hullbreach hitting the stack, but it's countered by the 2-costed mana drain in response once Mark gains priority. Derek then pays enough for Scourge of the Throne, and moves to combat. He puts the Xenagos trigger onto the Scourge, and goes at me since I'm on the throne. I take 11 from the hit after the Scourge gains a +1/+1 counter from the Dethrone trigger, and Derek then untaps it. He moves to his next combat step, putting the Xenagos trigger he gets at the start of it again on the Scourge. It's now at 22/22, and he swings it at Chris. It gains another +1/+1 counter from Dethrone, and Chris blocks with a Sphinx, and Derek then passes. I draw and discard, passing. Chris untaps and draws, and Mark just keeps growing his Dragon's Hoard worth of treasures. Chris then activates his Shapeshare, having it become a copy of Merieke, and then taps it to steal a Scourge from Derek. We then see a Skyshroud claim, and Chris goes to find 2 forests. He then passes as he's searching, and Mark goes to work. He activates a Chaos Wand, targeting Derek, who reveals until he hits his copy of Rishkar's Expertise. With the spell in the stack, he activates Merieke to target Niv, and then untaps her before the ability resolves. He does it enough times to steal the rest of Chris's creatures, and then draws 7 cards because of the Scourge being on his side of the board once Rishkar's resolves. He plays from his hand an Icy Manipulator, and then moves to his turn. At the end of turn, Derek also gets back his Scourge, kind of, as the Shapesarer stops being Merieke, and we're pretty sure that means it gets destroyed. Mark untaps and draws for turn. He casts his Sword of Feast and Famine, slapping that bad boy onto Niv Mizzet. We then head to combat with Niv hitting Derek, and it triggers the sword. Derek discards a card, while Mark untaps his lands, and with nothing else, he passes. Derek draws and casts Dragonlord Atarka. Mark casts Force of Will for the alternate cost of 1 life and exiling a card, which Chris then casts Absorb on. The counter is then countered, and Atarka then enters, dealing the damage to Merieke and the Puppeteer. With the targets on the stack, Mark untaps Merieke and retaps her a few more times to more or less steal everything on the board except for my Advocate. Merieke is then destroyed, and everything else that's stolen is destroyed as well, and Derek then passes. I draw and play a forest for turn. I cast Crucible of Worlds and go to combat. I hit Mark for 2 with my Advocate and pass to Chris. Chris is able to cast an Avatar of Fury for the reduced cost, and, responding to the elemental bond trigger as it enters, Mark flashes out a Notion Thief to steal Chris's draw. Chris then has enough to cast Phage from his hand, and he passes to Mark. At the end of turn, Mark uses his Chaos Wand and targets Chris. Chris exiles until he hits Utter End, and Mark has the spell Exile Xenagos. Mark plays a Mystic Gate for his land for turn, and then casts a Dimir Doppelganger. We then see enough tap for Time Warp to give himself another turn, and before shifting through his phases, he gives the Notion Thief the Sword of Feast and Famine, and gives Derek a smack for 5. Derek has to discard a card, while Mark untaps his lands. Moving to his second main phase, we see the return of Merieke, who's able to be tapped thanks to the 1000-year elixir, and he does so to steal Phage. We move to Mark's extra turn, and he draws. He goes to combat, and puts me out of my misery by hitting me with Phage, which has me losing the game. He also swings the Notion Thief back at Derek again, and this has Derek discard another card, while Mark untaps his lands, and passes turn. Derek uses his library, and doesn't pay for the tithes. He doesn't keep any extra though, and taps out his main phase for a Finale of Devastation, with only 6 going into the X. This has him finding a Bane of Progress, and it hits the field, and responding to the trigger, Mark steals the Avatar from Chris, and once that's done, activates his Chaos Wand. He targets Chris again, and this time exiles until he hits a Sublime Epiphany. With that hitting the stack, Mark has his Dimir Doppelganger become a copy of the Avatar of Woe. He then bounces Derek's library to hand, draws a card, makes a token copy of the Avatar, and taps the Bane down. In a surprising move, he then lets the board get wiped of artifacts and enchantments, which has the Bane of Progress gaining several counters. Derek then passes turn. Chris then taps and draws. He plays a Fractured Identity and exiles Merieke, giving Derek and himself a token copy of her. This has the Avatar getting destroyed, and Chris passes. Mark plays a Flooded Strand, cracking it and taking 1 to find an island. He asks for creatures in his yard, and has the Dimir Doppelganger become a copy of the Godhead. Moving to combat, he hits Derek for 4 with the Doppelganger Godhead, and then casts a Baleful Strix. It enters, draws him a card, and he passes turn. Derek casts the Great Henge in his main phase, and taps enough for Xenagos, gaining 2 life from tapping the Henge. He moves to combat, putting the trigger on the Bane, who is still getting pumped by his +1/+1 counters. Derek doesn't want to lose it though to the Baleful Strix, so he just passes to Chris. Chris untaps and draws for turn. He puts to stack a Villainous Wealth, which we'd seen earlier, where X is 5 and targeting Mark. Mark says nope with a simple counterspell and passes turn. Mark draws and plays a Buried Ruin. He moves to combat, and then passes through it after thinking on it for a minute. In his second main phase, he casts Karn, Sign of Urza, and upticks the Walker. He reveals his top 2 cards, and Chris picks the land to go to Mark's hand. We then see an Energy Flux dropping onto the battlefield, and he passes turn. At the end of turn, Derek activates his token copy of Merieke to try and steal the Doppelganger Godhead. Responding to this, Mark activates the Doppelganger's ability and changes it into a Puppeteer. Derek untaps his board and pays to keep his Great Henge around from the Energy Flux trigger. He then casts a Worldly Tutor before leaving his upkeep step, and he tutors for a tally, putting the dinosaur on top. He then draws it for turn, and casts it, gaining 2 life from using the Henge, putting a +1/+1 counter onto it, and then draws a card. Moving to combat, the tally gets the Xenagos pump, and he swings a tally and the Doppelganger at Mark. They get a tally trigger resolving first, and he exiles the top cards. He hits a Council's Judgment from Chris, and casts it first. Derek picks the Baleful Strix, while Chris picks the Notion Thief, and Mark picks the Notion Thief as well, which has the thief get exiled. Derek then casts his Metamorphose, gaining 2 green mana as he casts it, and drawing a card. He then casts Mark's Evil Twin, drawing a card from the Henge, which we see almost immediately as he casts Nature's Claim to blow up the Strix. This has Mark gaining 4 life, but then takes a hit for 15 once all is said and done. Chris plays a Swamp for turn, and taps out for 9. He casts a Kicked Rite of Replication, and has 5 token copies of the Puppeteer come in. One of them looks a lot like a Monarch token, and Chris then passes. Mark untaps and draws. He plays a Plains and casts Rags. This hits a lot of stuff on the board, and before letting it resolve, Chris activates his Merieke token to steal a Tally. The board is then mostly wiped, and with the token copies of Merieke dying, the creatures stolen with her are destroyed as well. Mark then casts the other half of the card, Riches, and has each opponent give him their choice of a creature they control. This gets him Derek's Bane of Progress, and he then upticks Karn, and this time, Chris gives Mark the Mind Twist. Derek pays the 2 on his upkeep to keep the henge around, and plays a Forest. He casts a Wilderness Elemental, and it gets a counter, and he draws a card from the henge. Moving to combat, the Xenagos trigger goes onto the Elemental, and gives it +13/+13, which he swings at Chris. Chris takes the hit for 26, and in Derek's second main phase, he gains 2 life tapping the Great Henge to help cast a Relentless Assault. He gains an additional combat step, and he bumps the Elemental by +26/+26 from Xenagos. This time he swings it at Mark, who blocks with a Bane, but is still taken out for the trample over damage. Derek then passes to Chris. Chris plays a Shockland, dropping a further 2 life so it'll come in untapped, and he just passes to Derek. Derek draws, and plays a Mountain. He recasts his library, and then puts to stack a Wheel of Fortune. This is countered by Chris's Undermine, and has Derek losing 3 life. Derek then puts the pump onto the Elemental with Xenagos as he moves to combat, and he swings it at Chris. Chris pieces out with Teferi's Protection, and with nothing else, Derek passes. Chris untaps and draws. He moves those painful lands away again, and wipes the board with the Wrath of God. Derek reveals the dragon that he'll be playing next turn though, and Chris knows when he's done, scooping it up to Derek. Game review time. So, I think there were a couple points in this game that probably could have been a lot better, mainly my opening hand of having 2 lands. I know I had Azusa and Oracle of Moldiah, but as you saw, without a 3rd and a 4th land, I never really got there. I think Mark probably was a little bit ambitious leaving the Bane of Progress out, and not using the Sublime Epiphany to counter the triggered ability. I believe his plan of action was to steal the large creature with Merieke, and then basically just beat Derek to death with it. Unfortunately, he lost out on a lot of good cards as a result of letting it go off, and I don't think the trade was worth it. Other than that, I don't think there was really anything else that was a big problem. Derek did what Xenagos likes to do, which is play creatures, make them big, and smack people, and Chris's Morophon deck definitely was an Avatar tribal-based deck, and it's a shame he wasn't able to kill someone with Phage, but at least someone was able to. Please be sure to tune in every Monday and Thursday at 11 AM Eastern Standard Time for a guaranteed new video. You can also follow me on Twitter at MTGMudsta. You can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/MTGMudsta. And lastly, you can check me out when I stream at twitch.tv/MTGMudsta. This video is brought to you in support by my patrons. If you're looking for a way to help out the channel, please be sure to visit the link below. Thank you all for watching this video, and don't forget, friends are just opponents you haven't eliminated yet.